There are some rivalries that become bigger than the products themselves. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Apple versus Samsung, Nike versus Adidas. And then there is a battle that quietly took over convenience stores, supermarkets, sports arenas, gaming events, and even the refrigerators of millions of people around the world. Red Bull versus Monster. At first glance, they might seem like two colorful cans filled with caffeine, but behind those cans is a multi-billion-dollar war. A war fought through extreme sports, marketing genius, celebrity endorsements, gaming culture, racing teams, and psychological branding. One company built its empire by convincing people they could fly. The other built its empire by convincing people they could unleash the beast within. And today, we're going to uncover how two energy drinks transformed into global giants and why this battle is far more interesting than most people realize. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand how branding alone can create billion-dollar companies, and you'll also discover which company may have secretly won this war. But to understand that, we need to go back to the beginning, long before Monster existed, long before energy drinks became normal, back to a time when nobody believed people would pay premium prices for a small can of caffeine. In the early 1980s, an Austrian businessman named Dietrich Mateschitz was traveling through Asia. During one of his trips, he discovered a local energy drink. The drink wasn't famous worldwide. It wasn't a global phenomenon, but it had something special. People loved it, workers drank it, students drank it, drivers drank it, and many believed it helped them stay awake and focused. Most businessmen would have ignored it. Dietrich didn't. Instead, he saw something nobody else saw. He saw an opportunity, a huge one. He realized that while soft drinks were everywhere, there was almost no global market for energy drinks. So he partnered with the creators of the original formula and created something new, a drink designed specifically for Western markets. That drink would eventually become Red Bull. The launch wasn't easy. Many people thought the idea was ridiculous. Why would someone pay more money for a tiny can when they could buy larger soft drinks for less? It sounded like a terrible business idea, but Dietrich understood something powerful. People don't just buy products, they buy feelings, they buy identities, they buy stories. Instead of marketing Red Bull as a drink, he marketed it as a lifestyle. Suddenly, Red Bull wasn't about caffeine, it was about performance. Adventure, risk, speed, ambition, the famous slogan became known across the world. Red Bull gives you wings, and that slogan changed everything. Red Bull began sponsoring extreme athletes, race car drivers, skydivers, mountain bikers, snowboarders, anyone doing something exciting. Every advertisement reinforced the same message. Red Bull wasn't for ordinary people, it was for people pushing their limits. And slowly the strategy worked, then it worked even better. Then it exploded, sales skyrocketed, the brand became recognizable everywhere, and before competitors could react, Red Bull had already established itself as the king of energy drinks. For years, it looked untouchable. But every king eventually attracts challengers, and the challenger that would threaten Red Bull's throne wasn't even called Monster in the beginning. The story starts with a company known as Hansen's. Most people had never heard of it. It wasn't dominating headlines, it wasn't creating viral marketing campaigns, it wasn't sponsoring Formula One teams, it was simply another beverage company trying to survive in a competitive market. But sometimes survival creates innovation. By the early 2000s, Hansen's noticed something important. Energy drinks were growing rapidly. Red Bull was becoming a cultural phenomenon. Consumers wanted more options, and that created an opportunity. Instead of copying Red Bull completely, Hansen's chose a different path, a very different path. In 2002, Monster Energy was born, and from the beginning, Monster positioned itself as the opposite of Red Bull. Red Bull felt sophisticated, Monster felt aggressive. Red Bull looked clean and professional. Monster looked loud and rebellious. Red Bull's can was relatively small, Monster's can look gigantic. Red Bull targeted ambitious professionals and athletes. Monster targeted gamers, action sports fans, rock music lovers, and people who wanted something bold. The claw mark logo became instantly recognizable. The black can stood out on shelves, and the branding felt dangerous, powerful, almost rebellious. Monster wasn't trying to be another Red Bull, it was creating its own identity. And consumers noticed very quickly. People looked at the larger can and thought, wait a second, I get more drink for my money. That simple perception became one of Monster's biggest advantages. Whether people compared ingredients or not didn't matter, the larger can created a psychological effect. Consumers felt they were getting more value, and value sells, especially among younger customers. Monster also understood something that many companies overlooked. Youth culture drives trends. If teenagers and young adults embrace a brand, that brand can grow incredibly fast. So Monster aggressively entered motorsports, gaming, skateboarding, BMX, mixed martial arts, music festivals. Everywhere young audiences gathered, Monster appeared, and suddenly Red Bull had a real competitor. For the first time, the king wasn't alone. A challenger was growing fast. Very fast, year after year, Monster expanded, sales increased, market share increased, brand awareness increased. And what started as a small challenge slowly evolved into a genuine threat. The energy drink industry was no longer a one-company show. Now there were two giants, two different identities, two different philosophies, two different visions of what an energy drink should represent. One represented focus, ambition, and achievement. The other represented power, rebellion, and intensity. Consumers picked sides, arguments started, fans debated endlessly. Which tasted better, which gave more energy, which had better branding, which represented the future, and while consumers argued, both companies kept growing. But behind the scenes, something even bigger was happening. A battle that would spread far beyond convenience stores. A battle involving racing championships, extreme sports empires, billion-dollar sponsorship deals, and one of the most shocking marketing strategies ever attempted. Because Red Bull wasn't just becoming a beverage company, it was becoming a media empire, and Monster was preparing a response that nobody expected. The real war was only beginning. And in part 2, we'll discover how these two brands turned marketing into a weapon, how they fought for global dominance, and which company may have ultimately won the energy drink war. If you thought the battle was only about selling cans of caffeine, think again, because while customers were comparing flavors and arguing online about which drink tasted better, Red Bull and Monster were fighting a completely different war. A war for your attention, a war for your identity, a war for your lifestyle, and whoever controlled that would control the future of the energy drink industry. Red Bull had already realized something revolutionary. Traditional advertising was expensive. Television commercials disappeared after a few seconds. Billboards were quickly forgotten, but unforgettable moments, those stayed with people forever. So instead of simply sponsoring events, Red Bull started creating them. They built a media empire around adventure. Extreme sports, mountain biking, snowboarding, surfing, cliff diving, air races, even Formula One. Every incredible stunt people watched online carried the same message. If something impossible was happening, there was a good chance Red Bull was behind it. Then came one of the greatest marketing moments in history. In 2012, the entire world stopped to watch one man, Felix Baumgartner, standing on the edge of space, over 39 kilometers above Earth. Millions of people watched live as he stepped off a tiny platform and jumped. He became the first person to break the sound barrier during free fall. News channels around the world covered the event. Social media exploded. People who had never even tried Red Bull suddenly knew the brand. It wasn't just advertising, it became history. And perhaps the most amazing part, almost nobody remembered it as a commercial. They remembered it as one of humanity's greatest achievements. That is the power of storytelling. Monster watched all of this, and instead of copying Red Bull, they doubled down on their own identity. They became louder, bolder, more aggressive. Monster invested heavily in motocross, BMX, MMA, rock concerts, gaming, drifting. And later, esports. As gaming became one of the biggest entertainment industries in the world, Monster was already there. Professional gamers, streamers, competitive tournaments, millions of young fans. Monster understood exactly where the next generation was spending its time. Their logo appeared everywhere. And just like Red Bull had connected itself with extreme athletes, Monster connected itself with youth culture. The rivalry became impossible to ignore. Walk into almost any supermarket. Monster didn't just survive, It became one of the biggest beverage brands in the world. That's an incredible achievement. In the end, this wasn't a story about caffeine, it wasn't about flavors, and it certainly wasn't about colorful cans. It was a story about vision, about branding, about understanding human psychology. One company taught people they could fly, the other convinced them to unleash the beast inside, and somehow, both were right, because in business, the strongest product doesn't always win, the strongest story often does. So the next time you walk into a store and you see those two cans sitting side by side, remember, you're not just choosing a drink. You're choosing between two of the greatest branding strategies ever created. But now the question is yours. If you had to choose only one, would you pick Red Bull or Monster? Let everyone know your choice in the comments. And if you enjoyed this battle, there's another rivalry that's even bigger, one that changed the smartphone industry forever. Samsung versus Apple, and trust me, you won't want to miss that one.